have 6 o'clock, and I would like to welcome everybody to the February 9th meeting of the New Bern Board of Aldermen. Would you join me in a prayer? And Heavenly Father, we just ask that you continue to us your protection and blessings as we do the people's work. And we pray that our work will be pleasing to thee and to the citizens of the city we all love. In your name we pray. Amen. Would you join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag of our country? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Dingle. Here. Alderwoman Harris.
Present.
Alderman Aster. Mayor Outlaw.
Here.
Alderman Kinsey.
Here.
Alderman Best.
Present.
Alderman Odom.
Here.
Okay, first item is the requests and petitions of citizens. Do we have any of those? Thank you. James Woods, if you'd like to come forward, sir. Give your name and address for the record.
Good evening, James Owens Jr., 1903 Country Club Road. I would like to thank the Mayor and the Board of Aldermen and staff, especially Mr. Montaigne. I see that the sidewalks in Pembroke are going past my house. I greatly appreciate that. Number two, as you know, I'm on the Stanley White Advisory Board, and I don't have a warm and fuzzy about the presentation that you guys are going to receive this evening. I really wish that if the board has decided or is going to make a decision to move the center to the 3rd Avenue location, that we take in consideration of maybe erecting a building, something that's like down at the farmers market that can be used by the citizens of that area. It has been mentioned several times in our board meeting, but I really would like us to really consider this. I think the citizens of that area would greatly appreciate that if that thought was given to them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Are there any other petitions?
No,
Okay. This time, let's go to the consent agenda.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as is. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. The motion carries. Mr. Stevens, item number 7.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 7 is a presentation of our comprehensive annual financial report and audit for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2020. All of you received copies of the CAPR and auditor's discussion and analysis prior to the meeting. Mr. Alan Thompson is here with us tonight, and he's going to present to you the findings of the audit and answer any kind of questions the board may have. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Thompson.
Well, good evening to everyone. You should have in front of you a presentation summary, and I'm going to read a few of the items in there in the verbiage starting on page 1, and then we'll take a quick look at some of the numbers. There were no significant audit findings. There were no difficulties encountered in performing the audit on the top of page 2. No uncorrected misstatements. No disagreements with management. Management did provide us a representation letter dated January 8th. Unaware that management consulted any outside accountants, auditors, other findings, issues. There was 3 down the bottom there, you see. Each of these has been discussed with management, finance officer, etc., and none of which were material findings in the audit report. On page 4, and going through the numbers, if you'll look at the top and fund balance, you can see at $21,681,000 consisted across the board in terms of overall fund balance. Unassigned or unavailable fund balance at $13,086,000. Restricted and assigned fund balance at $12,488,000. General fund expenditures at $34,610,000. Fund balance available as a percentage, 24.83. Unassigned fund balance, $7,331,000. Unassigned fund balance as a percentage at 21.18. And then unassigned fund balance available excluding the FEMA Florence fund balance at 32.15. And you'll see, and I'll try to make this on some of the charts the point as we go through. The fund balance is consistent across the board on the top. There's a big due from, in the general fund from the FEMA fund, which if it were removed, and I think your finance officers talked with you if y'all have had meetings, then your percentages will bump even higher when we begin to look at some of the charts. You can see there the next revenues over and under expenses before contributions and transfers from general fund is a minus 2.7 million. The electric fund is positive 2.6. The water fund at 2.1 positive. Sewer fund is 1.293 positive. And then you see your cash and accumulated depreciation, electric fund 84 million, and fixed assets 48, and accumulated depreciation in cash at 19,246,000. The water fund, same numbers, 70 million in fixed assets, 21, and accumulated depreciation in cash at 11.3 million. And the sewer fund is 102 million, total fixed assets, accumulated depreciation at 37.5, and cash at almost $7 million. And the next section shows cash and fund balance, and total cash in the general fund is 10.7 million. And you can see the big bump from last year, and it should continue to be a bump up as you receive some of the FEMA funds. The electric fund at 19.2, the water fund at 11.3, and the sewer fund at 6.9, almost 7. Other governmentals at 1.8. There'll be a issue on not an issue, but a discussion point on debt as we look through this. And the fund balance, you can see general fund balance 21.681, electric fund at 50,208,000, water fund at 40,493,000, and sewer fund at 60,480,000. And you can see in your three proprietary funds, electric, water, and sewer funds, over the 5-year period presented, there's a bump up in each year, and if you go back, it's a nice increase. FEMA Hurricane Florence is a negative of $3,796,000, and other governmentals at $510,000. So I'm going to bump down to the bottom of the page. I will come back. The very last line shows business type activity debts at $34 million. And you see, if you went all the way back to 2016, where that same number was $60 million. So a dip of $26 million, which is awesome. And so when you look at what we just walked through at cash and fund balance in the proprietary funds, those three funds, electric, water, and sewer funds, you see where the fund balance is bumping up, but your cash is not bumping up. And what's happening is it's reducing the debt. So your fund balance is increasing because your debt's declining, and that's why your cash is staying about the same across the board. So property tax rates going back up, you can see there at 48, and then collection percentage 99.07. If you exclude motor vehicles at 98.99, and the property valuation, the levy amounts you can see for the 5 years presented. And I didn't discuss governmental debts, but you can see there at almost 8.5 million, fairly consistent across the 5 years presented. And then on page 5, you can see a breakdown of general fund revenues and expenditures by department for the 5 years shown. The expenditures the revenues haven't changed dramatically in that period of time. The expenditures range from $35 million back in 16 to $33,407 in the current year. If you'd be kind enough to flip over to page 6, you can see where your total fund balance there in blue and it's restricted and assigned in red. And you can see in 19 where that restricted and assigned bumped up real high, and that's really where you got this big receivable from the FEMA. And until that, and as that has bumped down in the current year in 2020 and will continue to bump down, and that's where you'll see your percentages that we looked at a while ago continue to bump up. On the bottom, the same thing is true. You can see where it dropped off significantly because you've got that restricted and assigned from FEMA, and as you continue to receive more funds from FEMA, that percentage will continue to rise. On page 7, same thing is true at the top of that page. And then you see on the bottom of that same page, the revenues over and under expenditures before transfers and contributions with the 3 proprietary funds showing a profit. The general fund has a negative. On the top of page 8, you see the electric, water, and sewer funds, total fixed assets, accumulated depreciation, and cash. On the bottom, you see a cash pie chart and fund balance chart with the respective balances underneath. 41,358,000 in total cash balances. Fund balance is 112,383,000. I don't know that I mentioned this earlier, but it is a really healthy thing, because even though your fund balances may be very high in any of the proprietary funds, what you're really looking at there is cash flow, and to be able to reduce the debt the way you obviously have adequate cash flow. On page 9, you see the collection percentages for the city in blue with the group weighted average in red. On the bottom, and on the top you see the property tax rates, same colors. Also on the bottom, the statewide average is in green. And the 2020 comparatives are not out, but you can see in prior years on the collection percentages where y'all were ahead of both the group weighted average and the statewide average, and I have no idea where those are going to come out because of COVID last year. On page 10, you see the total property value and levy amounts for the 5 years presented. You see the levy amounts actually increasing every year, even though there was some dip there in property value. On the bottom, you see the breakdown in a pie chart of your revenue in the general fund, and you can see the ad valorem tax at 51.43, and that's why we're always talking about collection percentage, levy amounts, etc., because it plays such a big role. And then on page 11, you see the same type chart for the expenditures, and see public safety at 55.46 being the dominant one there, with public works at 17.14 being the next. The main reason you hire us as an audit firm or any firm is to issue an opinion on the financial statements as a whole. We issued an unmodified report, which is a quote clean report, the best opinion you can get as a city. I'm happy to answer any questions you've got of me, not just tonight. If you go through the report, you call me anytime. If I'm not in office, tell them to give me my cell number and I'll get you an answer.
Alderman Odom.
I'm not sure if this is a question for you or staff. This was the first budget year that we had eliminated a stormwater fund. So the historical nature of that for these past years, would that be now in the general fund numbers, since that's where the stormwater utility is actually located now?
Should be.
Yes.
Yeah, it's basically the line item under your, anywhere you would have seen like cash versus fund balance, you would have normally seen a stormwater line item there that was just eliminated and absorbed into the general fund at that point. So while it doesn't show it zeroed out, it is kind of reflective, I think, of absorbing the stormwater fund.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Did you participate in this, or did your staff do all the research?
The staff did most of it. I'm always engaged. I may not be on site, but I'm always a participant.
So, the reason I was asking on page 10, obviously the values were, I assume, down, that due to Hurricane Florence, property values overall went down. They're on the way up, and I assume that's pretty much what was going on there.
Yes, sir. That's accurate.
Of course, that affects our ad valorem revenue stream, which was down a little bit, it seemed like. But on page 2, did have a couple questions. Efforts need to be made to ensure revenues are collected for projects with negative fund balances. Otherwise, transfers need to be budgeted. When we set up an account, a project, so to speak, that project should self-fund itself from a budget amendment or something. Another revenue stream or fund should not be supplementing that project. Give me an accounting process on that, a canon on how that works.
No, what you're saying is accurate. Once you set up a project, you have a budget for revenues and expenditures, and that's what should govern that specific project.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, what I'm saying also to what you just said is you're saying there's negative fund balances. So are we not adequately making budget amendments? What's the problem? Are we having we don't have proper contingencies written into these projects, what would be the area of an
Well, as projects begin to wind down, they may have a negative balance, and it may not be a huge issue other than an accounting and cleanup issue. It just needs to be closed out and run back through whatever it is, a proprietary fund or the general fund. So if there's a capital project fund for one of the three proprietary projects or funds, then as it winds down, it may end up with a negative fund balance. It just needs to be closed out and put back into the electric, water, sewer fund for good accounting purposes.
Well, the question I'm kind of getting to is, were there more negative situations like this? Because I know from a project standpoint, many times there's money left over and we close that account out. You didn't report that, but I'm trying to find out from financial fiduciary questioning whether or not there are more of the negative ones or the positives, which I would imagine. Mark, don't we have quite a few to close out and still have money in them?
Yes, sir. A lot of projects we have remaining balances that, obviously we clean up. That money that was budgeted goes back into the general fund balance at that point. But I'm trying to think back at which one of these it might have been. It seems like even the Hurricane Irene fund, as y'all will remember, I think there was one that came to y'all just recently where we had some expenditures that were still there that we just recently had to do a budget amendment on. While we had those expenditures, we had to clean that up, and that's been 10 years ago when we had those expenditures. That would have been an example of a negative balance where it would have been zeroed out, but ultimately, that's kind of an example of something I was trying to think of.
Yeah, it's strictly a small issue, or it would have been a finding in the audit report and not.
Well, you got it in here, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I understand.
City needs to clean up cash accounts. There are multiple funds with positive balances but pooled cash negative balances, which are resulting in unreasonable interest earning allocations. Help me with that one.
So, North Carolina Cash Management Trust is that is what that acronym is. So if you have, if that amount is, if you have negative balances in a fund, but you're still allocating interest earnings from the cash management trust to that fund, then you're over allocating specifically an income item to a fund that has a negative balance. And that's what we're trying to say. If you pulled it out of cash and made it a payable rather than a negative cash, you wouldn't be allocating interest earnings to that specific fund. That's what I'm saying.
Accounts receivable balances need to be reviewed. Some have carried for years. If they are not collected, obviously we have an allowance for doubtful accounts, and I would say on Avalon it's 1%, whatever. So, are you giving us any bellwether on what a reasonable accounts receivable should be as far as an allowance for a doubtful account? That's what you're talking about here, aren't you?
It's exactly what I'm talking about. But what I'm really saying too, though, is even though you may have an adequate allowance for doubtful accounts, at some point you need to take that, you need to go through and write off the bad accounts against the allowance for doubtful accounts rather than continue to carry the bad accounts forward. So that when whatever the formulas you are using maintains consistency, if that makes sense. So if you're carrying an account that's 10 years old, it might be factored into your allowance, but at some point it's not collectible. Just write it off and then modify it.
Alderman Odom.
Mark, do we have a policy that dictates when we charge off bad debt, essentially?
I would have to ask Mary. I'm sure that we do. If you're talking about like collectible revenues, say for electric fund, like electric customers and things like that, writing off bad debt for sure. But you may have some.
Yeah, we utilize the state debt set-off process, which is about 3 to 4 years from the time we send them something till they finally give up and give it back to us. And typically when the state says we've tried for 4 years, we're not going to get your money, and sends us a letter saying that they're writing it off basically and send it back to us. Typically in my past experience, we would write it off at that day. Here, we tend to hang on to it because we get a lot of repeat customers. We get customers who come back and owe us money from 10 years ago and want to open a new account, and we plunk that onto their current. So we do have some of those, and we probably do need to dust off the policy and look at it and decide after 5 years we're going to forgive their debt, even if on year 6 they come back and want to open an account again with us. So that's kind of why I think that's the reasoning I was given for why we hang on to some of those, primarily the utility accounts is what we're talking about. We have very little other accounts receivable outside of utilities.
So it's 90% having to do with enterprise funds.
Or more even, maybe. Yeah, I would say, yeah, that's what it is. And so it's, once again, we can absolutely look at that policy if we think we need to write it off sooner. It's just, we just hang on to
Alderman
it.
Harris.
Yes, if we did go through the process of deleting the debt, writing it off, is there a way to flag in the system just in case they come back and try to start a new account, that we need to be cautious in our system?
Sure, yeah, we certainly can. And we already do. Their system, yeah, if they've had a bad debt and it's on a debt set off, their account's been flagged already.
Okay.
Yeah.
I certainly, and also just in full disclosure, hope that you understand that it's not as easy as just flagging someone who was a poor customer. They will go to many lengths to reestablish an account with the city and again start a bad debt with the city. Oftentimes it is they'll get their cousin to start the account for them, but ultimately they're the ones living there, and then they accrue a bunch of stuff. And that's the reason why staff has come before the board many times and requested, and the board approved, limiting the amount of months that we sit here and accrue this debt, or working with people on these payment arrangements, because some people do try to game the system a little bit and work against us.
Understandable.
So are we saying that legally, and I don't know, Scott, if you could answer this, so if we wrote off something after 5 years, but the account is flagged and they come back at year 6, we can't collect it once we write it off? If they owe it to us, they owe it to us.
Sure, if we can track it, we can collect it. Now, there is a legal defense to that, and the statute of limitations on a contract is 3 years. So if we get into a TIF, they're gonna win.
Even if we did or did not, that's okay, excuse me.
The writing off is an internal accounting issue, it's not a legal issue. It's
Okay.
It's just how we keep track of, keep score.
So at any point, you could continue to collect, continue to collect the debt.
Yes, ma'am.
Would we be able to require a higher deposit outside of what we already have for a policy if they're,
The board capped our deposit.
okay.
This board did. Back when you first came in, you limited the deposit amount to, I think it was $500.
500.
We did have it to where it was 2 times, or it was basically the 2 times the highest month or whatever during the period, I think is what it was, but now it's $500 capped.
Gotcha.
So the board would have to change that policy.
Gotcha.
Okay, does the board have other questions? Thank you. Now, let me ask you this before you get going. As far with other cities and all, is this standard? I know there's 2 or 3 different type of audits that you can do, but do you have any other recommendations that the city, from an accounting review or whatever, should be doing that we're not? Are you satisfied with, obviously, we've got a clean audit here. Do you have any other recommendations?
I don't, no, sir. And we do quite a few, I think about 120 governmental audits in the state. So I would not recommend, though the board can definitely choose to do any detailed audits on specific funds or accounts that they choose. But this definitely satisfies what's required by the state statute, what is required by the LGC and the state treasurer to issue debt, that's for sure.
Are unfunded employee benefits and things like that within the scope of your audit?
Yes, sir. And I think Kavanaugh does most of those studies across the state.
And so, I didn't see that, but is that anywhere in your audit?
Yes, sir. It's recorded as a liability in all the funds. You could look, I think, in the notes as well as Exhibits 1 and 2, and you'd see the liability.
Okay, is it in your audit somewhere? 'Cause I
Yes,
didn't
sir.
see it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, could you just review that with us real quick?
It's actually in the larger book and not in the,
Okay. You wouldn't happen to know what that is right now, would you?
The short,
Because every time I hear what it is, it's a bunch more than it was the last time, and I'm never happy. It's about like the national debt.
Are you referring to the OPEB liability, Mayor? Is it-
on page 12, you can see about 3/4 of the way down the page, total OPEB liability and governmental activities at $35,387,000. The LEOSA pension obligation at $2,966,000. So those are part of what, it's a huge number. I don't claim to be an actuary to be able to come up with some of those numbers. I will say this, changing policies, et cetera, to get to where you reduce that is definitely a long-term process because you've got retirees and other folks that are part of that. But we've had many folks over time start that process because delaying that, looking at it won't make it any better in the short run. I mean, in the long run, that's for sure. So I definitely would encourage you to continue to take a look at it.
What are cities doing? Wellness programs or early retirements? I mean, or what do you do to try to work through that? I know Charlotte had like a $250 million one or something. Of course, it's a much bigger city, but do you have any recommendations for a city what they should do to try to mitigate that situation? Obviously, we're never going to get it down to zero.
I think the biggest thing that's a part of that is, as it says, it's other post-employment benefits. So it's retirees, their health insurance, et cetera, what you're doing after that. And I think the board has to get comfortable with what they're going to provide long-term for employees. And the reason I said it's a long-term process is because you have current agreements with folks or you have current existing retirees, et cetera, who are going to be grandfathered under what the obligations that were made to them. So what you're really doing is changing policy for new hires, et cetera, people who may not invest it in the future. So it's not I'll change a policy and it's fixed. It's a long-term process to make it work and make that OPEB liability decline.
Well, I just never have understood, on all these audits, I've never understood what is a safe harbor for, in our particular situation, or any other city, if there was a percentage or whatever. If I were guessing, I'd say a $5 to $10 million one would probably be a safe harbor. I don't think 35 million is where you want to be. But I really don't know too much you can do besides, well, Mark, we've talked about this before, and I don't even remember what we decided you could do besides make some draconian cuts or somehow reserve funded or something. I don't know.
I think you definitely could look at cash reserves. I think there's some, as Mr. Thompson indicated, there's some long-term decisions without inciting the internal riots or morale issues you could potentially look at implementing, which is, any new employees that come in, they would be subject to a different set of rules than the existing employees, and the existing employees kind of are grandfathered in because that's how they were hired in at certain levels with the expectations that they're going to have this retirement. Of course, all that can change, but what I'm talking is just from a morale and from an employee standpoint, that can be difficult for a board to make a decision on. But when it comes to any future employees, they wouldn't have known any different.
Right.
So therefore, that's what he's talking about with the long term. It may take you 20 years or 30 years for all these employees to get through that system, but eventually you can dwindle down that OPEB liability, the post-employment benefit liability, by implementing a separate structure for new employees versus existing.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Now, there's complications. There's obviously complications to that because then you start looking at, well, is some other municipality offering the post-employment benefits and they're funding it with some of their cash reserves? Then at that point, they may have a better marketing of a position than you would if you don't have that and you don't have those post-employment benefits. So there's pros and cons the way you look at it.
The other thing I would say to it, in my presentation, I rarely discuss what's on Exhibits 1 and 2 in the audit report primarily because all three of the enterprise funds, any liabilities, et cetera, are already built in there, so you're managing that just as they are. The general fund is the only one in Exhibit 1 that's significantly impacted, and the reason is because Exhibits 3, the fund balance, fund accounting, is converted to a business-type balance sheet, which then there is where you put on all the liabilities and fixed assets that are not traditionally in the general fund, if you will. And traditionally, a board manages their general fund on an annual basis, and they budget on an annual basis. So while this liability continues to rise from a business-type activity, sticking it on the balance sheet, you're still going to manage it on an annual basis. The only challenge, so I'm not diluting that fact, at some point in the future that continues to rise as a percentage of your overall general fund expenditures, that pie chart we're talking about. And what you're attempting to do long term, if you did make a change, is try to keep that percentage in line. And one of the things we've seen, especially in some of the schools, is that percentage of retirement and post-employment benefit continues to rise as a percentage of salaries. And when you get to 18-20% in terms of as a percentage of salary, it's a huge number to deal with. So I would encourage taking a look at it, being aware of what your options are, but realizing you manage that on an annual basis in your annual budget process as well under current circumstances.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? We appreciate your all.
Thank you, sir.
for
Have a
being
good
with
day.
us tonight. Mr. Stevens, number 8.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 8 is a presentation by our consultant, CPL, on the Stanley Recreation Center. Tonight we have representatives from CPL with us. I'm going to start here with Foster, but from CPL we have Reggie and Rachel. They're here. They've been very involved in our process, especially working with the Stanley White Advisory Committee. So at this point I'm going to turn it over to Foster to present our representatives from CPL and to give you a presentation of the Community Recreation Center that they have a design concept of.
Good evening, Mayor, Alderman. We originally contracted with CPL back in July of 2020, and they have stayed very busy working on the public input and the design concept for this project. And I'm happy to introduce Rachel Nielsen and Reggie Scales, and they're going to show you through this PowerPoint.
All right, good evening, Mayor and members of the board. Again, I'm Reggie Scales, as Foster has indicated. And what we want to do tonight is basically walk you through the process of what's happened over the last 6 to 8 months. Essentially, we came on the scene in the summer of 2020 and began working with the city to develop the project. And so some of the things that have happened since then. Let's just start with, I think we're all aware of, number one, the budget. And that $8 million, $5.6 million of that is commitment from Fema via grant, and then you have the insurance as well as state of North Carolina funds. So, who has been involved to date? Really, it's 3 entities, which is the advisory committee, CPL, which is us, and then FEMA are kind of the 3 entities. So let's talk about each. The advisory committee, obviously you established that committee, and as a part of the resolution, facilitating community engagement in the design and development of the facility, recommending the recreation services and programming, serving as a liaison between the city and the citizens, and then recommending and promoting alternative funding sources. So that was the charge of the committee. We met with them initially in late August, and we've been meeting with them fairly consistently on a monthly basis since that time. Myself and Rachel, who you'll hear from in just a moment, we are the folks who are before you, but there's a pretty solid team of professionals who are supporting us as we work through and develop the project. FEMA, the third piece of the puzzle. FEMA and their involvement, obviously we are here because of the impacts of the hurricane and destroying the facility or rendering it really unusable. And FEMA is generally the funding agency here. So last year, as a part of this process, and after the funding was granted, the city requested that FEMA consider relocating the facility from the existing site to a site on 3rd Avenue. Number of reasons for that. The big reason is why we're here tonight. Is because it's in the floodplain, number one. And so there are a number of issues surrounding that and the building and its long-term sufficiency being in the floodplain. One of the big ones is, in the future, if the city wants to use that facility as an emergency shelter, obviously it can't be done if it's relocated in the same location as a part of the floodplain. The other issue is increased insurance cost as a part of relocating the facility in that floodplain. One of the things that we found out, and you hear a little bit more from Rachel as we go through some of the findings, is the needs of the city and the residents now are a little different than they were in the 1970s, right, in terms of what is needed for a recreation facility. And again, you'll hear a little bit more of that. Another issue is the opportunity to redevelop the existing site of, or the former site of the Stanley White Recreation Center as a part of overall Henderson Park redevelopment or reinvestments. And so those are some of the things that kind of drove the request to relocate the facility. The floodplain, that issue and the flooding has been a consistent part of our discussions with the advisory committee as well as the community. And you all know that you've leveraged quite a bit of grant funds from FEMA as well as other sources for floodplain mitigation in and around this area and other subbasins. And in talking with your Public Works Director and reading some of the master planning reports, even with the work that's being done, it is still a pretty good bet that that facility is going to be impacted by flooding if you have the same type of weather event in the future. All right. And then I guess the final issue associated with that and, moving it really goes to the proximity to the existing site. It's approximately 670 feet from the existing site. And again, you'll see as we move along in the presentation, we've done some photo simulations to give you an idea of what kind of the building of the elevations will look like on the north and the south side of that building. But getting back to the environmental assessment, as the city moved through the process, FEMA determined that relocating the facility would require the development of an EA, or an environmental assessment. And that's what we're working on now. An environmental assessment essentially is a document that looks at the built environment, which is people, but also the natural environment, animals, protected species, all of those type things. And so the document itself, there's a purpose, there's a need, and then once you establish that, you evaluate the existing site, the sites that you're looking at, and then you take a look at the impacts kind of throughout. And so a core part of that is a stakeholder engagement process to the city's benefit. You'd already started that process as a part of your programming and planning, so we overlaid the EA process with that, and it has worked out fairly well. The schedule itself we'll talk about here in just a second, but the EA and developing that has to go through very specific processes for FEMA. The first step is completing the document or the draft, which we're very close in doing that. FEMA will review it and give us comments. We'll respond back to them. Then it will go to the office of their chief counsel. They have 30 to 45 days to review it. Once they do that and we respond to comments, there's a 30-day public comment period where the public will have a chance to comment on that. And then after that, it goes to the FEMA regional officer, and he signs what's called a FONSI, or finding of no significant impact, if everything is in order in terms of how the project is developed. So the schedule itself, we'll get back to that in a second. Primary focus in how will the decision be made, and this is what we're talking about in terms of what's in the building, what's happening around it. 3 key issues, and they're listed 1, 2, 3, but you can't separate them. The one is community desires and needs, As we develop these projects, there are always desires, but we try to focus on the needs as it relates to the budget and the benefit to the community. The process and what we've been doing, I'll take you from August all the way through today. There are 4 stages. The engagement phase, which is what I am here for, and then you got the site design and master planning, the programming, concept design, cost control, and financial modeling. And this may be a little bit hard to see, but if you look over to the far left, that is August and where we started, and you can probably make out that community engagement piece. That was supposed to wrap up in October, but once FEMA came in and we were required to develop this EA, it kind of pushed things out a bit. So let's get specific in terms of the engagement, and we'll tell you what we've done. So the initial plan was to hold 2 engagement sessions in the community, and that was for everybody to come in and give us their comments and their opinions. The first session was August 31st. It was pretty successful because we did get really, really good feedback in terms of the community. It is certainly understood that Stanley White is an important historical member of the community. That's the one thing we picked up. But the second piece is the importance of that facility to the community. That's why it's critical that we keep focused and stay on schedule as much as possible. But we took that information, and then after that, we held a series of 4 small group meetings. And at those small group meetings, they were virtual. We got feedback from the youth, from the city, departments, from the economic group, and there was one other group. Rachel, remind me, what was it? Yeah, nonprofits. Yeah. So we held online sessions with those groups, and as a part of that, we also did online surveys while those meetings were going on. That was one piece of it. The other piece is we had an online survey that anybody in the community could take, and I believe that's still open if folks are interested in taking that survey. And then once we did that, we did what's called a field truthing. So we had the information, we gathered it, we held another meeting, and at that meeting we used it to test the things that we had heard from the public during the initial session and the engagement sessions. And at that point, we were starting to move into the concept design phase. And at the concept design phase, that's where we start to sketch and start to get some understanding of actually what's going in the building and really how it relates to the needs of the community. As I mentioned earlier, the FEMA process kind of elongated this, and we ended up doing another session in December, a public session where folks could come in and give their comments and opinions. And so the findings, which Rachel's going to take you through, as well as kind of what's happening in and around this. As you would imagine, just some different thoughts and ideas. I thought some of it was very creative, some of it's innovative, but the key is it's reflective of the needs of the community today. And ultimately, the focus and what we're trying to do is to put a plan together and design a facility that is sustainable. In other words, it goes for 50-plus years and beyond. So with that being said, I'm going to stop right now and let Rachel take over.
I'm just going to touch on some of the high-level points of this, and this is available for you if you want to go into all of the details. But one of the things, as Reggie mentioned, we had 4 focus group meetings that we dived a little bit more in-depth with these groups. We met with the youth, we met with city departments, we met with nonprofits, and we met with some of the other community organizations and community leaders across New Bern and specifically within that neighborhood. We talked about outdoor spaces and needs wherever that facility is, kids' gardens, community gardens. We had some amazing insight at the youth focus group meeting in particular. These kids really talked about needing a space for after-school programs, a space to do homework, a space to hang out with their friends that was safe, small group spaces, larger spaces. in the survey, and these findings are indicative of the survey and the in-person voting and surveys we had, as well at the larger in-person public sessions, court spaces, activity rooms, and game rooms, making sure that the facility provides safety, security, utilizes SEPTED principles, really provides for activities and programs that the community needs, and well-lit outdoor areas. In terms of the spaces that people wanted to see, really those community meeting spaces, spaces for networking, for groups to get together, a catering teaching kitchen. This came in, tied into some of the nonprofit groups in the area, spaces to teach about nutrition, media rooms to really provide outreach in terms of computers that are available to the neighborhood, lessons for seniors as well as for youth, walking track. And then again, on some of these, we had kind of every single item that was checked. So to some degree, a number of these items were pulled out as things they'd like to see. As I mentioned, computer classes, cooking, nutrition classes, specifically spaces for activities for seniors. That really ties into the walking track a lot. Fitness and dance classes, and a combination of the remainder of the items. So with that in hand, with that community engagement that we took over really from August through to November, December, we moved into the next step of the process, was to look at really actually the second item, that programming piece. And again, this kind of takes us to where we are today. This program, I know you can't see the details of that, but this program was developed in conjunction with all the information that we gathered at these community meetings, at the focus group meetings, at the large public input sessions, and the survey. And we also had a really great a workshop with the advisory committee where we all sat down in person and workshopped out what are the priorities of all of these spaces that were listed, everything that was voted on and was talked about. What are the priorities to move forward with that make, as Reggie said, make this facility something for the future needs of the community for the next 50 years. And so what we came up with out of that was a prioritization of those kind of court spaces, obviously those larger scale spaces that allow for a variety of different activities. They allow for large groups to come in and to meet, and provides, in this case, the 2-court gym, which is larger than what is available elsewhere in New Bern. The meeting spaces, those multi-purpose meeting rooms, you can see in that light purple in the lower corner. That was something that came out of those advisory committee workshops, was the ability to have flexibility within the plan to allow for change over time. So the ability to have small group meetings, large group meetings, to bring in people from the community to have networking events within the neighborhood, and to have after-school programming in there. Going through the rest, we have the 2 basketball courts that allows for cross-court volleyball, cross-court pickleball, cross-court basketball. We have the 3 divisible by 3 multi-purpose room area. The darker purple area is a teaching kitchen and catering kitchen, leading into those multi-purpose rooms, and also provides for concessions, which is a big revenue generator in some of these facilities too. In the light blue, we have a health screening room that came up in our public sessions as a key need for this community, was to tie back into the public health aspect of it, as well as spaces for staffing for the Parks and Rec Department, for their for their facility manager, for people running the programs on a day-to-day basis at this facility. The other 2 light purple rooms that are side by side, one is a game room and then the other is a media room. So again, both pretty flexible spaces that allow for different types of activities and programs. The areas that are in gray are what we call support spaces. So those are the required restrooms. Those are storage spaces that are needed. Those are janitor's closets, single or unisex family restrooms as well. And because the discussion about the walking track was something that was a high priority item, we integrated that into a second floor of this facility to really capitalize on the efficiency of the plan. This walking track would be approximately 10 to 12 laps to a mile around there, around both courts. The large open pink space at the top, that is the fitness center, so that is cardio, weight equipment. That space shown there is about 3 times the size of the space that was in the previous Stanley White facility. And then on the far right side of the plan is a fitness room. Again, it can be a flex space, multi-purpose room, maybe designated towards dance classes or different activities like that, but also good for after-school activities with additional restrooms and other functional spaces, support spaces upstairs. In looking at the design of this facility, we wanted something that really looked forward into the future, but still tied to the materials available and that you see around New Bern. We looked at a design that was inviting from the street, that allowed for outside gathering spaces to really tie back into the community and tie back into some of the green spaces as well. This view right here would be, and again, this is on the 3rd Avenue site, which is what we were tasked to develop as part of this environmental assessment. This would be the view from 3rd Avenue looking at the facility. So again, it's fronted on 3rd Avenue, and we'll have a site plan in a moment. And then this would be the side view from Broad News. With that site, as I mentioned, we were tasked with looking at that 3rd Avenue site for this environmental assessment. The facility really pushes as close to Henderson Park to try to connect it, because we know that there's a lot of activity that happens at Henderson Park that will always happen at Henderson Park, since that park, through its development and through the LWCF grant, will remain a park in perpetuity. And so really connecting the people who will be at the ball fields there and at the different programs and playgrounds there, driving them back through to this facility. We've provided in excess of the parking required by code by zoning for this facility. So that number is over 100 here, and that's because the type of facility it is generally generates some bigger events with a lot of people coming. That parking can also host different community events, as we know the Stanley White Recreation Center parking and site did as well, with blood drives and other activities. We have a connector right there in front of the apartments, and that is to provide a kind of safer connection between Henderson Park and the facility, to make it more pedestrian friendly, to really pull the sidewalk back from the street and kind of separate the pedestrians and the cyclists and the vehicles, and potentially there providing a multi-use path as opposed to a sidewalk, which generally is about that 10-foot width to allow for both pedestrians and cyclists on the same pathway at the same time. Just bringing in that overlay right there is the floodplain line. So just showing that the entirety of that 3rd Avenue parcel is outside of that floodplain line. It does come into a little bit of the apartment area, as well as those properties that sit right in front along 3rd Avenue in front of the apartments. As Reggie mentioned, we provided a couple of photo simulations here. You can see on the map, on that blue arrow, is kind of the vantage point, the viewpoint at which you're looking across that Broad New Street intersection to that building behind. And again, there is some more site development with the parking and landscaping that would occur there as well. And then in this one, this is kind of standing in front of those apartments back towards Henderson Park, looking down at the facility down 3rd Avenue. Come in here.
If we could back up just one slide. Just a couple of comments from the advisory committee as far as the site plan itself, and they did look at this last week at their meeting. So if you can see the concept here, the advisory committee did ask us to go through and evaluate the green space and those ponds that are just to the north. And by the way, the existing or the former facility location, you can see that in the lower right corner there. But they asked us to take a look at that. Some other things they asked us to do is really to kind of look at the design and how water is going to flow if the site is selected. Other things in terms of some of the softer elements that go along with the facility, thoughts on how to honor Stanley White as a part of the design. Certainly it's a big discussion, even up to putting a bear, I think, in front of the building as some of the other things to connect the building with the community. Let me also, if you look at the site in terms of how the concept is set up, and I believe you understand that the proposed building is the blue outline structure there. We are looking at this as a part of the EA in terms of not only the impacts of what's happening in and around and using that site, but are there additional things the city can do in terms of investing in that neighborhood. And I discussed before a little bit about the park and what's happening there. That will be a part of that discussion as well. So let's go back to the schedule here. You can see where we are now. This schedule, by the way, was developed in August, and you can see we're not too far from it. We had a little bit of flex in there, but we're trying to get the EA wrapped up. And so we're not too far off the schedule that we had originally planned. And this is QA. Again, glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Is that your presentation? Are you?
Yes.
You ready for some questions?
Yes.
Okay, does the board have questions? Yes.
Reggie, when will the EA be complete?
And I talked to actually the Terracon. They're doing the geotechnical analysis. I talked to them, I guess, about 5 o'clock this afternoon, and they said they'll finish up tomorrow. That's kind of the missing piece. And we hope to have that within the next week or so. But once we get that, probably a week or 10 days on the outside, 10 days. So we're close.
What's the total square footage that you have in the building you're showing us?
This one is about 34,000.
And it fits within, you've designed something to fit within the budget that we have, the $8 million budget.
Yeah, we're working on the financial modeling piece of this right now.
It's great that it has the components that we're hearing people talk about, and I do agree that your comment about it's a building that needs to last us 50, 60 years into the future, and then the future needs of our children and our seniors and our adults. And I like the connectivity. I think it's important that we have connectivity to Henderson Park, because I would hope, and I'm assured, that we will be upgrading these fields and making them be part of the overall programming that will happen at the center. Is that correct, Mr. Hughes?
Yes, it is.
Good job. Thank you.
It's pretty impressive that the time that you have spent putting the plan together to explain the whole entire nuts and bolts, how everything is going to connect and actually work. Because the value of money, how much it's going to cost to do one or the other, looking at the long-term effect, this model here pretty much brings it home. And thank you for your time and efforts for putting the time in where it needs to be to make it work for the
Thank you.
future
And
of the city.
yeah, in reference to the budget, and as you would imagine, we do a lot of these projects, linear and vertical, highways, bridges, airports, seaports. But the common theme is most of them are multi-generational investments. And so this obviously is one of those type facilities. And so sustainability is kind of a buzzword that's been thrown about. But when you're making a decision on, and it's a lot of money to invest here, you obviously want a return on that investment. And that is a facility that's going to serve you well for, again, multi-generations.
Mayor,
Yes,
I just want to say I appreciate all of the hard work that you guys done in regards to pulling this together, but I do just want to state for the record as a representative in the community and for the Stanley White Advisory that I am not in agreement with the presentation, but I appreciate the hard work. I just want it to be on record.
What are the next steps? I mean, are they just continue to move along this path and we wait for the EA, or do you need some guidance from the board?
Yeah, I think at this point, Alderman Bingle, we would allow Reggie and Rachel to continue the EA process. I think once the environmental assessment process is complete, which means the accumulation of the final data that FEMA is looking for, along with the geotechnical work that's being completed now. Once that stuff gets submitted, at that point, it's kind of in FEMA's hands. And when it gets in FEMA's hands, there's certain criteria that they've got to go through to meet the federal registry as far as their requirements and law. Once that's happened, I think they render essentially a FONSI.
Finding no significant impact.
Right. And if there's a finding of no significant impacts, then the alternative site is considered to be an appropriate alternative option for the city. And given the federal rules, technically, if there is an alternative site that's available, then the city is supposed to consider that versus relocating it again in a floodplain. So that's kind of the next step. So essentially, it's let's complete the EA, it's continuing down that process, and then get it back in FEMA's hands. And then at that point, it's up to FEMA and their timelines.
If the Board of Aldermen made a motion that was approved with roll call on item number 8, would that in any way influence the environmental audit?
Well, the board has made a tacit request and approval when you requested, number one, the funds, and number two, the relocation of the facility. So you're already on record as far as the EA is concerned. But if you want to make a motion that's not going to impact the EA in any way.
Question for Foster. Mr. Woods brought up a question. I know there's been a lot of conversation about if this site were to be chosen, what could be done. I know we tried to salvage the pad at the old Stanley White. He mentioned a farmer's market type facility. I'm assuming because it's got doors and you can raise it up in a flood and it would be more resilient versus building an actual recreation center back there. Do you have any thoughts and ideas on what would be there?
Yes, we do, and we've looked at a variety of things, but we really want to get through the environmental assessment, determine whatever happens with the location of the Stanley White Center. If it is deemed that the center is relocated to the 3rd Avenue site, then we will come back with a concept plan of how the actual Henderson Park would look. And yes, we have taken into consideration all of the comments that citizens as well as the advisory committee have provided for that.
Thank you.
Does the board want to take any action on this item tonight? The ultimate decision is going to be made by the Board of Aldermen, and I'm ready to get the citizens of New Bern a recreational facility built. And it's been two and a half years almost since the Stanley White was devastated by Hurricane Florence, and I've already publicly made my position known. We all day long, in Alderman Best's ward particularly, we're looking for buyouts. People don't necessarily want to be elevated, they want to be bought out. Sometimes when the buyouts are not available, they elevate. But most of the time, FEMA, with past empirical data, they do not, in the residential end of it, recommend building back in flood areas. They recommend going to 12 feet, 14 feet elevations that meet current code enforcement for the city of New Bern. So the board can do what it wants, but I have several months ago made my conclusion that in the best interest of future insurance premiums for future Red Cross safety programs and hurricane events, a place that our residents don't have to go to Brinson Memorial, to Trent Park School, or to Ben Quinn, that there's a facility within walking distance. I long ago concluded that that location is in the best interest of the citizens. So I think that if you want to get final approval from FEMA, the Board of Aldermen, which make the ultimate decision, I feel like we're somewhat vacillating, and I'm not trying to be not being patient, but again, I don't want this to continue any longer than it has to, that it's time that the citizens of New Bern get a new recreational facility. The budget amount, several months ago, the board, I think unanimously, was your vote unanimous, Mr. Odom?
I believe so.
To set that budget, and so the money's there. And also, it's important that we give the citizens of New Bern the most amount of opportunities, particularly for our youngest citizens to our oldest citizens, our senior citizens, that we have within the new facility a lot of things that the 1970 model didn't have. So if the board wants to wait until the environmental assessment, that's fine. But I think at some point the board has got to make decisive, definitive absolutes on this and move forward, move our city forward, and get through with all the meetings and do the right thing and get the center built.
Now, Mr. Mayor, it was well spoken what you just said, but I think that the decision right now is waiting for that last decision to be made by FEMA to say that we can move forward. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, that is correct. And obviously, the board can make any decision you want in terms of moving forward. But when they received a letter signed by the city manager requesting this new location, that was the board saying, we would like you to consider this new location. And so as we worked through the process, that triggered the EA. And now we have to go through the environmental assessment process. So again, you have the option of providing a motion or anything you want at this point. But it's really, the process is in play right now. It needs to play out.
So do we have to wait on that process to be completed, making a decision there?
Well, if you want to leverage those funds for the Third Avenue site, yes, you have to wait for that process to be completed.
That's what I was under the impression that we have to wait.
FEMA is not going to, we're going to build a building somewhere and get reimbursed. FEMA is not writing a golden check for $8 million. FEMA is not going to do anything until this board decides where that building's going. And no sooner than tonight is a good time to get started on the first step of a journey of getting a new recreational center built. And FEMA is not going to write a check or sign off on this project until this board takes leadership and definitively decides where it's going to go. Alderman Best, did you have something? Alderman Odom?
With me, I thought that was the whole initial process, was that we was going to wait on the environmental assessment. So that is almost at a completion date, so that's what I'm waiting on.
Okay.
That's my decision.
Okay.
Is there, I mean, what is, based on what I'm hearing you describe as the floodplain and the executive order that was done by the president many years ago, President Obama, in taking things out of the floodplain. What's the chance that they're not going to approve this site?
In my discussions with FEMA, and there have been quite a few, there are certain issues that they look at, and one of the key issues is on the built environment side, is it negatively impacting the existing character and fabric of the neighborhood and the community? That's the key thing that we're evaluating and looking at. And as that relates to the structure, the proximity to the existing structure or the previous structure, and the proximity to the neighborhood, and then some of the things that can be done by the city to mitigate that 670 feet relocation, we'll document all that in the EA, and then they'll make the determination. The initial findings in terms of the natural environment, I haven't seen anything that really is kind of a red flag here or there, so I think we're probably going to be clear there.
I think it's also clear, just so we're clear about the facts about, I know some questions have been brought up about the EA process. The EA process was initiated by FEMA. That's part of their evaluation of us considering an alternative site. The board elected to choose to look at an alternative location, which is required. If an alternative location is available, that you consider that. And hence, it leads to you going through an environmental process to where they want to determine, number one, is it suitable for the location? Is it suitable to the community? Is it out of floodplains? All these different things get considered. So I think the main thing is that the board is kind of steadfast still in that direction, and they're not vacillating back and forth. So as long as the scope of work hasn't changed and the alternative site location is still being desired by the board to be considered, then we're still marching down the path and having FEMA evaluate this alternative location. Then at that point, yes, they need to give you a recommendation if this is a viable alternative location for the Stanley White Recreation Center. If it is, then at that point, the board has a decision to make.
Go ahead. I was going to say, Reggie, in regards to the environmental assessment, when we're talking about that, the vital aspect has to do with the impact of the community, correct?
Right.
So when the community has come on numerous occasions and explained that they wanted to be back in the same location, that's being documented and given to FEMA as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. So the myriad of meetings that we've had in person as well as virtual, all of that is documented, and we've got hours of voice recordings, we've got videotapes, all that goes in the environmental document in an appendix, and so yes, they will have access to it.
Yeah, and then my second thing is tonight it was put down as a presentation. I think it would be ill taste to try and make a motion to follow through with this without having the opportunity for citizens to come, obviously, in March at that first meeting to give their feelings, because again, there's a majority of the community that feels that there is a way for it to be built back in the same location and taken out of the floodplain by raising it, and some of the new findings that we had on the Stanley White Rec Advisory Committee, and with that, we never had the opportunity to see how we can put it back in the same location. It's always been based on the new location, and so out of respect for the community, and that's everybody in the city of New Bern that has a vested interest, I don't think it would be a good idea to make a motion to vote, especially because we've stated in previous meetings that we would wait until the environmental assessment is completed.
Alderman Best?
Mr. Scales, I want to flip back a moment. With your design phase of this building and with the advisory committee, did any members of the advisory committee or the public have an interest in having a Red Cross Center in this rebuilding of this Stanley White Rec Center? Was that ever, I didn't see it anywhere in here, so that wasn't a concern of the citizens?
It may not be, yeah, and what you saw in this presentation is a very, very brief summary of all the information that we have. I had a discussion with somebody during the first meeting in terms of it being documented. Rachel, do you?
Yeah, it was our first public meeting. We had a board where people could come up and put anything they wanted to see in it on a Post-it note. We had the Red Cross Center came up there, it being a voting location, precinct location came up on that too. So, yeah, there was a variety of different things that came up.
Yeah, and so, yes, I knew I remembered it. I just wanted to qualify it, so yeah.
Yeah, in your engagement findings here, you list facility could be an emergency shelter.
Yes.
So it was in your findings. Yes.
And that was
So it
based
is
on a
there.
recommendation from Alderman Aster as well, just to put that out there.
Alderman Odom.
Reggie, could you, I asked a question earlier, and I may have not have been clear, because I don't think your answer addressed what my question was. So you talked about the boring samples and getting those results in a week. My question is, when can this board expect the final resolution from FEMA on whether or not this is a viable site or not?
Okay, and this is where it gets kind of murky. So our plan is to have a document in FEMA's hands within the next 10 days. All right, they will take the document and review it and give us comments. We've been sending them, general sections, and they've been pretty good about turning it around in a few days. So once that occurs and they're satisfied, the next step is it goes to the Office of Chief Counsel. And so let's say we're working through this process by early March. We'll be, optimistic. And so once they get it, and I'm speaking in generalities here because I can't get specific, but once they get it, then they have 30 to 45 days. So let's push it out to mid-April. That process is complete. All right. Once that is done, there is a 30-day comment period. All right. And then that pushes us out to approximately mid-May. And then once that's done, we respond to those comments, and then it goes to that regional administrator, and then they'll sign the finding of no significant impact. So as you can see there, it could be as soon as early June, could be as late as August. All right, so I'm giving you kind of a broad time frame here. So.
Thank you for that clarification. And as far as, if you're looking for feedback on the plan, I think it's great. This plan was designed with the alternative site in mind as far as the design of it. I've been a proponent all along that said that we've got a budget to work with, and we've got two options. Build it back where it is based off of that same dollar amount, because the dollar amount we received, correct, Mr. Stevens, is based off of rebuilding the current building as it was to today's standards. That's where the $8 million figure came from. So you can have $8 million figure being spent where it was to have the same thing you got, or you can build this facility with more amenities,
right.
2 gymnasiums to host tournaments and other things for the same dollar amount. So if you're looking for a straw poll from the board, I support the plan as you've designed it. Thank you.
Mayor, I just want to understand, so I think, and I'm in agreement with it, is that we stated months ago that we wanted this alternative site looked at, we wanted it vetted, we wanted an assessment, we had our designers design to that site because we were looking for an alternative site. So we're just waiting now for the FEMA assessment to come back and go through the process as we would want it to, and then we'll, if they agree that the site is okay, so that's what they come back and they say this site is okay to build on. Is that what we would know? That what they would say one way or the other, yes or no?
And I want to be clear about where the Board of Aldermen stand in this process. There was what's called a scoping letter signed by your city manager that went to FEMA in last summer. That started the process for, obviously, evaluating a new site on 3rd Avenue. So that is, again, your tacit approval of the request for making this happen. So the process is in play. But again, the board has the option of making whatever decision you would like.
I don't think it would be fair to make that decision if FEMA's gonna say you won't have the money without this environmental assessment, because if we don't have the funds, then we've only got the $500,000 to build back with. Is that correct? If we don't get FEMA funding?
Well, we can go
I
back
don't
to
really
that.
understand where you were going with the 500,000, but.
Well, I mean, isn't that what our insurance gave us? Wasn't it $500,000 I saw?
500,000 is what you, that's the money that you received to date for the loss of the facility due to the flooding from our insurance. But you have been approved for $8,006,669.05 if you build it back at that existing location in the same footprint that it's in, the same building, the same one gym, the same couple rooms you have for meeting space. And that number is based upon the fact that you've got to elevate it, build it to new codes structurally underneath of it with the pilings and everything else.
I understand that. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we went ahead tonight and said, well, we're going to build on the 3rd Avenue and this is what we're going to do, and the environmental assessment came back and said, we don't approve of that site, then we couldn't, if we had voted to do that, we could not do it because we would not receive the funds, correct? That's my question. So I'm saying that,
if they find that there is a
well-
significant impact on the FONSI, if you want to, it wouldn't be a FONSI, it'd be a FOSI, I guess. At that point. If they find that, then at that point, yes, I think you're taking the assumption that you're going to build a recreation center back and without FEMA funds.
Okay.
I don't know that for sure, so I don't want to commit totally, but I would be under
That's what
the
I want
impression
to
that would be the
understand.
case.
And, this process going forward, we've committed to go forward to look at an alternative site. I want the results back. I still support the alternative site, but I want the results to come back to make sure that we are in line with what FEMA wants us to do.
I just want to clarify, because based on the Stanley White Advisory Committee, it was brought to our attention that it could be built different. So I want that on the record again, that the building could be built up. And then based on what Alderman Bingle is saying, if they feel that it is an impact for the community, that means we're back at the original. Still, we're allocated the money because we've asked for it to be changed, but if they deny it, we're still back at the original location. So the funding will still be there.
The funding will be there. The funding will be for building back the exact building. If you remember, we had the architects go down there and estimate, or actually provide a very detailed estimate of what it would be to build back Stanley White just the way it was a month ago before it got torn down, back at that location, elevated into the new code, and that's the $8 million you see right there.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying based on the information so the community can understand, because things have been said. And also, again, there's no tax dollars being spent on this. We're not taking any of our money. So if it does get denied and has to be built back in the same location, there is a possibility that the board can vote to add more money to be able to build a building over in that location. That's not off the table. We just never made that decision because we have this funding and we want to stay within the current budget. So I just want to let that be known on record as well.
And the board certainly can re-vote and take that decision, but the previous decision of the board was they're going to spend that amount of money on the rebuilding of Stanley White Recreation Center. So unless that changes, that's what we're planning to spend.
My only other comments, I think Ben Franklin used to say that decisions are always easy as long as somebody else has to make them. And I really appreciate the input from the citizens of the city of New Bern. I respect each and all their concerns and what they would like to see. And I've heard quite a few opinions, but I've really not heard definitive, absolute opinions of the board. Now, a simple motion and approval in spirit of the presentation on Stanley White Recreational Center subject to environmental assessment approval would be what I would think would be in order. I'm not here to cart a block think that we're going to do this thing without an environmental assessment coming back. But a motion to approve it subject to the environmental audit being that this site is approved would be what I would think would be in order, because at some point, this board is gonna have to take some action if you think that the folks up there in Washington are gonna write checks. So we can just, I mean, the longer we put this off, the longer our citizens do not get a return to normalcy. So,
But Mayor, I believe what they're telling you, and again, maybe I'm just not understanding, that we've already done that. We've already made that motion. We've said that we are going to use this alternative site in lieu of, you know, depending on what the environmental assessment.
that's not what I'm.
Am I
that's not
understanding
what
that
I think
correctly?
Is coming back from FEMA. That's not what I think FEMA is hearing. I think FEMA is hearing that there's a lot of a lack of action on the part of the board as to where we want to see the city of New Bern go with recreation facilities to replace the Stanley White that was damaged beyond repair during hurricane. They're looking, FEMA is looking for leadership from the Board of Aldermen based on all the input and all the research and all the meetings that have been had. And we can just wait a little bit longer to do that, I guess. Yes, sir.
Or you could look at it like this. CPL has presented a concept plan based on the 3rd Avenue location. Does the board support that concept plan based on the environmental assessment that is being submitted to FEMA? Because we really haven't heard a comment from you whether you liked it or not, other than Alderman Odom, so you may want to look at that. It's not, nothing's set in stone for that, but you support the plan that CPL has provided for us to review based on the environmental assessment process we're going through.
And I would, you know, make a motion to that I support that concept plan that we've been presented tonight based on the outcome of the environmental assessment with that wording in there.
That
Yes.
information would be documented, and I think it is, you know, like I said, this was a presentation without listening to the community, everybody in the city of New Bern that benefits from the Stanley White building. I think it's not a good decision to make a motion, because we still need to hear the community, because even though we have this hard decision, we still need to represent the voices of the community, the city, and the majority of them feel that there can be an alternative to the same location, and we have not addressed that. We have not done anything on that. So to state that, to go on record, it's going to be a vote based on this going to FEMA, putting it in that record, and it's going to make the assumption that everybody agrees with it, and we don't.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a second. Alderman McKenzie, do you have a question?
You just said what I wanted to say. Go ahead. I'm good.
I want to say something. CPNL, I think that this is a great presentation. I like the concept plan. I like the fact that this is a plan that has a center that we're gonna rebuild back out of a flood zone. But this is a presentation, and I just don't feel good about voting on a presentation, even though the motion that Alderman Bingham has presented to the floor. I think that, me personally, I want to wait to get a full report from FEMA.
And again, I'm making it purely because I do accept the concept that they have.
I do
That
too.
concept is for that footprint. It would be a different concept, of course, in a different footprint, but the caveat to this is that the statement is added on based on the environmental assessment. And furthermore, in order to have the environmental assessment, the full impact, we have to have a public hearing and have the input of the citizens anyway. I think what our design team wants to hear, and I think what FEMA wants to hear is, are we good with this? I mean, they're gonna have to weigh into all the facts, but if we're not good with this design, and I don't have any problem, it's a concept. It's not the flat out full plan, it's a concept, and I'm good with the concept, and that's why I made the motion.
I agree as well, because I'm getting more for the money from what I see from the footprint, from what I see, it's a lot of work been put into it, and it can give you everything that you dreamed of in order to move forward for the future. And I think this is the right way to go.
There's a motion and a second. Any other additional comments before we do a roll call?
Yes, again, it's a presentation. I don't think we need a motion. You can all go step by step and say whether you like the concept or not. But to the citizens, they feel, again, that the transparency is lacking, and I don't feel we need to have a motion, something set in stone, when we don't even have the full information from FEMA. Things could turn around and they deny it, and then here we are again. I think it's great for a presentation, but to make a bold move to do a motion, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. Any other comments? We'll have a roll call starting with Alderman Odom.
Alderman Odom,
Yes.
Alderman Best,
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey,
Yes.
Mayor Outlaw.
Yes.
Alderwoman Harris,
No.
Alderman Beagle.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to item number 9.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 9 is a public hearing and consideration of the board to adopt an amendment to sections 15-472, 15-474, and 15-486 of the City of New Bern Land Use Ordinances. I guess as a just kind of a brief on this, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Ruggieri. At your October the 13th, 2020 meeting, the Board of Aldermen asked that the Planning and Zoning Board review the land use ordinance in respect to height limitations in the residential and commercial waterfront overlay districts and the River Station mixed-use overlay district. They have done so, and they've provided some recommendations. There's a memo that's included in your packet. Obviously, we need to have a public hearing, but first, let's turn it over to Mr. Ruggieri. He's going to give you a description of these modifications to the land use ordinance.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the board. As the city manager stated, on October 13th, the Board of Aldermen gave direction to the Planning and Zoning Board to look at 3 specific issues in our land use code. The first one being the physical extent of the residential waterfront overlay district. Code changes, any code changes that would be required based on the increase in flood elevations with the new flood maps that we approved last June, and to address the non-specific kind of height standards that are in the riverfront, that are in the River Station overlay district. So what we're looking at here is, in the yellow, is the residential waterfront overlay district. It's section 15-472 of our code. At issue is that small box there that you see up in that blue small box up there in the corner. That property is actually subject to 3 different overlays in our code: the residential waterfront overlay district, the River Station overlay district, and also it's in our historic preservation overlay district also. Considering the size of the lots, and it's a unified development, being that both sides of the street are under common ownership, were platted at the same time back in 2007. One side of the street is subject to the residential waterfront overlay, while the other side of the street is not. Development of that site becomes a little odd when you look at it and juxtapose it to the Queens Point development, which was approved and built before the residential waterfront overlay district was approved, so it has a much larger height. The property across the street is outside the overlay district also, so that would have a much larger height, and it would leave these 8 lots here looking kind of foolish in the grand scheme of the development. So we were asked to look at that. The Planning and Zoning Board made the recommendation to the Board of Aldermen to simply just remove that blue box from the residential waterfront overlay district, so it's essentially a change to the overlay itself, and remove those standards from that one small parcel, so the waterfront overlay district would stop at Queen Street. If anyone has any questions along the way, please ask. Go ahead. Sure.
If you go back a second. So the pink area, the Trent River, so this pink area here is where the,
That's the commercial.
right, so it's where
Yep.
the Marriott
Correct.
courtyard is, that
Yep.
area there.
Yep.
So that has a different height restriction than
Yes.
the yellow, because that's all commercial, because that's the DoubleTree there.
Correct, yes, ma'am. So it has a different set, that has a different height standard there, and that's somewhere at 60 to 66 feet above mean sea level in that area for that section,
But
which
just
you can
for
go a
that one
little
section,
higher.
But nothing else, the others all
The other
match.
go right back into the residential waterfront overlay, which today, as it stands, is 44 feet to the highest point of the roof from mean sea level. My next slide will change that.
Okay, and then your box towards the end where you want to change now, will bring that to the 60 or the 44?
It will go to 50. It'll go to our regular zoning district standards because it is in the, we're getting ahead, it's in the River Station mixed-use overlay district. So further along, part of the recommendations that the Planning and Zoning Board had was to change the kind of non-specific height standards of that overlay district, which talks about height in stories and not in feet, to change that to what our R6 designation is, our residential 6, which is a maximum height of 50 feet to the highest point of the roof. Which would be really consistent with surrounding development.
Mr. Jeff, the yellow is already considered the residential waterfront, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we would just be removing this area.
The blue
right
box.
here. Okay, just double checking.
Yeah, which is 8 lots.
But can I ask you
Sure.
what you're gonna do beyond that? Are we gonna come back so this is so strange to me because I remember when the pink part happened and they built the courtyard there, and that was it was a controversy at that point.
Correct.
To build that. So they changed that little piece here. We're gonna change that piece. Now, what's gonna happen on the development the rest of the way? Have we taken that into consideration? Are we gonna come back and have this up and down, or are we gonna try to maintain the same concept all the way around our waterfront?
Well, the overlay district, the residential overlay district has its own height standards, okay? So that's 44 feet today above mean sea level. Recommendation would be change that to 45 feet later on. I'll get into that. Beyond that, it would be our regular zoning code or any other height restrictions that we have. These two overlay districts here that we're looking at, and there's also another commercial overlay district, MLK in 70, that has some higher height standards. But they would just default to our regular zoning code, which generally for residential is 50 feet.
Because I remember there's another overlay that the property, the vacant property there, the old lumber company.
Yeah, River Station. That's a whole, that has its own.
They're calling
overlay.
that River Station, that's a separate overlay as well.
Correct.
But,
Yes.
so they're considering this part of that same, they're
It
calling
will be,
all of
yeah.
that River Station?
Yes, ma'am.
So from this development all the way to Mayola is now
Oh.
being considered River Station, or to the railroad
From-
tracks?
From Hubie's piece.
To the railroad tracks?
Correct.
Would be River Station?
River Station.
Okay. Just want to make sure I understand that.
Other questions?
You going to the next slide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sorry.
That's fine. You know, this is, it's
It's
a little
confusing.
technical. Yeah, when you have 3 overlays and 3 different ways to measure height, it gets very confusing. Believe me, I know. Okay. So the next change that we address, and they get easier after this, is a change to section 474 of our ordinance, and that talks about the height in the residential overlay district. As you recall, our flood elevations changed about a foot, sometimes more, but for the most part, about 99% of the city changed their base flood elevation about a foot. Considering that we have a height cap at the top end of our height, and if you squeeze the bottom up, if you pull the bottom up a little more, you're losing essentially a foot of developable space. So to really remedy that and make it very simple, a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Board was simply up that 44 feet to 45 feet to just kind of stay with the same overall height of the building mass, essentially, because the bottom got pushed up and the top stayed the same with the increase in base flood. And I do have a little picture of that later on, how that works. And that's strictly with residential overlay. Also in that, and as we've seen after Florence, in our historic districts, we had a handful of properties come through and ask for elevations of their structures. So there was no remedy in the code to allow for someone to elevate their structure, say if it's a historic home in the floodplain, and it's at the height cap, and it has to be pushed up maybe 5-6 feet to get outside the floodplain and the flood zone and be in a safer condition for the structure itself. There was no way to get beyond the 44-foot cap. So the exemption was made based on the recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Board to actually allow, in those instances where someone is elevating, when they're inside these residential or commercial waterfront overlay district, to allow that elevation of that structure and exceed any height cap, as long as there's two caveats to that, they're both in A and B, that there's no increase in the building. So you're not building more, you're not changing the building at all, you are simply building up the building from beneath.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, that you're not going above what the regulatory flood protection elevation is. So if you to meet the minimum code, let's just say you have to be up 10 feet, but someone wants to say, oh, well, I want to go up 12 feet. Well, that's not allowed. You can only meet the minimum code to get above our regulatory, to get to the regulatory flood protection elevation. And this is kind of an idea of what that is. So we have base flood elevations set throughout the city in all our flood zones. And this is an example here of an 8-foot flood elevation. And we get that from FEMA. No one can really change that. There's a process to do it, but for the most part, it's kind of is what it is. So, for instance, if there is a property such as this one that has a base flood elevation of 8 feet, our building code requires actually 2 feet of freeboard. So your finished floor elevation, where you walk into your home, where you open your front door, that level right there has to be 2 feet above the base flood elevation. So those 8 feet plus the 2 feet equals the regulatory flood protection elevation. In this instance would be 10. So elevating any structure, if you were to go above the height caps that are established in any of the residential or commercial waterfront overlay districts, you wouldn't be able to go above 10. So your first floor wouldn't be 11 feet or 12 feet, it would have to be 10. So those are the two exemptions that are allowed when you're elevating inside these overlay districts.
So, over where the hurricane took a lot of those houses out, will this be a benefit if they rebuild in this location?
Correct. If they want to, if there's elevation required to meet the rule,
Mm-hmm.
to be at that level of safety, then yes.
Okay.
And lastly, as Alderman Bangle touched on all three changes at once, was a change to the River Station mixed-use overlay district standards. So currently, as in your packet, you'll see the strike-through in that language just talks about stories and not in height. And when you get into stories relatively height, it's really, it's a tough argument to make, and it doesn't allow for much consistency in applying the code. So we went through the code itself and looked to see what would be the best fit based on the uses that are described in the overlay as having stories as height instead of feet. And it really just comes out to our existing standard in our residential 6 zoning district of a height of 50 feet. So everywhere in River Station mixed-use overlay where there is a mention of height and it talks about that height being between 2 to 3 stories or 1.5 to 3 stories or something like that, that's just been simply changed to 50 feet, which is consistent with the rest of the zoning code in the city. And these are just more examples of the changes. And that's it. So the Planning and Zoning Board has approved these at their January 5th meeting and is asking for board consideration.
I've got one more
Sure.
question. So with the 50 feet, so if our elevation now is 10, is that what is 10 or 11?
Yeah, it's 8, 9, 10, 11.
So basically, they're building then 40 feet of house to get 50 feet, correct? Or are you talking
Correct.
from elevation 50 feet?
It depends if you're a floodplain or not.
Well, that area is a floodplain.
Correct. So if you're in the floodplain, so you start measuring from your finished floor elevation, essentially for the structure itself.
So you're going to have a structure that's going to be 40 feet, potentially,
But
less.
you're in the overlay, you still have a cap. So you got to work within the cap.
Okay, because again, I don't understand why we're not trying to streamline this. We're making, you've allowed people exemptions, 45, you're going to 50. We know the floodplain is 10, you're allowing people to go to 45 feet in that area. Why don't you just make it all even and just say you can go, you're raising these houses, they're exempt, they're going higher than the 44, the 45 feet because they're having to be raised.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be easier to put a level that might be consistent throughout the area, so any new bills would be consistent and you don't have all of this?
Well, every build within each overlay will be consistent. Beyond that, absolutely, as you remember in 2015 and 2016, we had the same exact conversation, and the ordinance before you today is the result of that. So yes, the answer is yes, it'll just take more code changes. But there is consistency within each overlay, which is the idea of having an overlay, is to create a consistency in a smaller area.
I might have missed it. For the blue square that's getting X'd out, what is that going to be now? What is it going to be zoned?
It'll be essentially in the River Station mixed-use overlay and the historic district, and will be removed from the residential waterfront overlay.
Gotcha.
And I think it's is it R6?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
I think it said R6.
R6.
Okay.
I couldn't find in the minutes, but was there any opposition?
No
I have not
opposition, no.
heard
I mean, the P&Z board did an excellent job. We workshopped this for 3 meetings.
Yes.
Went over the entire process, how we got here, how to measure height in different areas. We have some really intelligent developers and architects on that group that understood and now offered some really real-world answers, I guess, to the questions. And we worked out a lot of different scenarios based on different heights and really what are we changing. So again, the recommendations before you were well thought out and have the support of the entire Planning and Zoning Board.
Thank you. If nobody else has any questions, can we do a motion?
You got
Public hearing.
Oh, we gotta close the public hearing. I make a motion that,
No, we have,
we
have
gotta
a public
open it
hearing
first. Duh.
I'm going to open a public hearing at this time. Anybody like to come forward, ask questions, make comments concerning this item, they're free to do it at this time.
I think we should add Jeopardy theme song. The Jeopardy song, waiting for people to come in.
Yeah. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to close the public hearing. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same. Motion carries.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt an amendment to sections 15472, 15474, and 15486 of the City of New Bern Land Use Ordinance.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call starting with Alderman Bingle.
Alderman Bingle,
Yes?
Alderwoman Harris.
Yes.
Mayor Outlaw.
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey,
Yes.
Alderman Best,
Yes.
Alderman Odom.
Yes.
Motion carries. Anything else on that item? Let's go to item number 10.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 10 is public hearing on amending the 2020 annual action plan for the Community Development Block Grant Program. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development requires Community Development Block Grant entitlement cities to submit an annual action plan summarizing the actions, activities, and resources that will be used to address needs and goals identified in the strategic plan section of the 2020 consolidated plan. At this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Owen Salin, and she's going to provide a presentation to you regarding this annual action plan substantial amendment.
Good evening, Mayor, Board of Aldermen. I'm going to go over the details of the substantial amendment to the annual action plan. I will quickly kind of review the annual action plan process. It's not been very many months ago where you approved our 2020 annual action plan, which basically provides the actions and activities for utilizing our CDBG funds for each budget year. It's something that HUD requires. And the reason that we are coming before you for a substantial amendment is due to additional allocations that we receive for CDBG, CB, or coronavirus funds. And that we have to go through the substantial amendment process, which includes citizen participation when that allocation exceeds, or the change exceeds 20% of our current CDBG budget year. So that's why we're here today. The primary reason is we received an additional allocation of $194,000 from HUD for coronavirus response. We also had a very small change that is in the plan related to our entitlement funds, which basically was a HUD error for us to decrease our budget amount by $39. So very minimal, would not have normally required citizen participation had we not had to accept those additional funds. Just for your awareness, we now have a cumulative amount of coronavirus funds that total $346,000. We will continue the process to fund rent and utility assistance. We will provide this to 2 nonprofit organizations. We previously have provided funds to Religious Community Services, or RCS, and we will be adding Catholic Charities as well. The rent and utility and mortgage assistance will be provided to low and moderate income households that have delinquent bills due to impacts of the pandemic. And the overall goal will be protecting against homelessness. A basic summary of the current annual action plan is the entitlement fund is at $258,000. We have divided that between general administration, housing rehabilitation, and the Duffy Field Stormwater Project. Those are ongoing projects. And then the coronavirus funding will fund general administration to city staff to administer the program, and then the rent and utility assistance to go to the 2 nonprofit organizations, totaling $312,000 that will be distributed out to eligible applicants.
Ms. Amanda?
Yes.
What, for the general administration, the $34,000, what does that entail in regards to what the staff will need to do? Is that for dealing with the rent, mortgage, and utility assistance?
It basically covers all of the monitoring and the reporting that we have to do annually for this. We actually, usually that would total a larger percentage of that fund, but we reduce that in order to be able to get more funds out into the community and into the hands of the people that have needs.
And for the rent, mortgage, and utilities, that's the sum of what we're gonna do on the previous in regards to them handling it. Will they specifically come to the city for anything, or it's gonna be?
The 2 nonprofit organizations will administer those programs directly. So applicants will apply directly to either RCS or Catholic Charities. That can provide up to 3 consecutive months of payments, and that will be something that will be performed by those nonprofit agencies. We will basically monitor and make sure that they're adhering to the guidelines that are provided by HUD.
And just further understanding, the 2 nonprofit organizations have already been picked, which is RCS and Catholic Charities, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we've worked with the community. We've worked with these organizations for months to understand their capacity and the programs that they were already administering. Each were already administering rent, utility, and mortgage assistance programs. So we've been working with them for months to kind of go over the guidelines to make sure they have the capacity to distribute these funds.
Awesome, thank you so much.
Okay, so we'll
Question, I
have
have a quick question.
Yes.
All the funds that we're giving them is going directly to the people. They're not using anything for themselves to pay the cost for the people. They're not using any of the money, are they?
The nonprofit organizations are allowed to charge an administrative fee for covering their staff costs for administering the program, but it is relatively nominal. I believe the amount is up to 15%, is that correct? Of the total allocation to that individual nonprofit organization. So it's relatively nominal, and the rest of the funds would be distributed out to citizens and residents that live within the city limits of New Bern.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are we still having trouble with the individual homes for the repairs of finding ones that meet the criteria? I know at one time we had a lot of money left over in the CDBG because we couldn't find houses that qualified. We would submit them and then there would be a hiccup and we would have, several years lag behind that we would have money available. Is that still an issue?
We actually went through a previous amendment, substantial amendment, to reallocate funds to new projects, which included the Duffy Field Stormwater Project, which is how we've been able to accomplish Phase 1 design and construction of that project, to reallocate unspent funds from previous fiscal years that was designated for minor housing repair. We did have some challenges as far as eligibility for that program, and then it was not an emergent repair or repairs that could be done, related to damages to hurricane. So yes, we did have challenges, therefore we reallocated to different activities.
So this current plan calls for $107,000 for housing rehab. Are we confident that we've got qualified structures that will meet the criteria?
Yes, we are partnering with the Redevelopment Commission, who is they're in the process of acquiring homes that will be eligible for rehab. So that's an active partnership to rehab homes that will be retained as rental units for the Redevelopment Commission.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to open a public hearing. If anybody would like to make any comments, questions, statements about this item, you're free to come up at this time.
Mr. Mayor and Aldermen, I have a couple questions. My first question is, how does a nonprofit qualify to be a part of the charities that are doing the rent? What are the criteria for that?
Mr. Stevens, would you like to answer that?
I'll defer that to staff. They're the ones that selected those. But generally speaking, I know Religious Community Services, the board has already worked with them as far as rent and utility assistance previously. So this would probably be no different. I'm not real sure about the Catholic Charities part. So.
Yes, through our needs assessment in the community for how we spend funds, we meet with a variety of different nonprofit partners to understand the capacities of the programs and the agencies that are active in the community. And related to the coronavirus funds, we identified partners that were already doing the rent and utility assistance programs. As Mark stated, the city manager, we have worked with Religious Community Services in the past, and we also had a lot of conversations with Catholic Charities as far as the work that they do here locally throughout Craven County and the region, and then nationally. Excuse me. And Ms. DeAsia Fulmore, our Community Development Coordinator, can add to that.
So with the CDBG funds, nonprofits take on the role of a subrecipient. So I'm nervous, y'all, I'm sorry. So for specific special activities like distributing funds for emergency rent and utility assistance, a nonprofit is the only way to get those funds distributed.
Okay, so if I'm a nonprofit, how do I qualify to do that? Is there a checklist that the city has to qualify me to do that? Or is it because y'all know I do it and y'all decide to give me the money? I have a nonprofit that does that. Nobody knows about it. I don't know that y'all did this. How can I qualify to be able to do this? Is there a checklist or something that qualifies me to be able to do that?
They would have that answer.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
next question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The housing rehabilitation of $107,000K. What qualifies a homeowner to get those funds? Or how do I qualify as a homeowner to get those funds?
So that's really two questions. As I mentioned before, we do a needs assessment annually where we poll various nonprofit organizations. Staff takes phone calls. There's a rigorous process as far as applying for those funds and the capacity of different organizations. We are always trying to research and find out what the community capacity is, what agencies are doing a variety of different work, and we welcome any nonprofit to participate and let our office know of what's going on and what the needs are. We do this on a 5-year annual basis when we develop our consolidated plan for 5 years, where we do, gather the needs from the community, and then we also do it each year annually. As far as the rent and utility, or as far as the housing rehab program, that is going to be the Redevelopment Commission that will be rehabbing homes they acquire to develop additional new rental housing in the market.
To answer your question too about the so there is an evaluation process. So how it works is, I did research to see who is currently providing rent and utility assistance, and then they go through an application process. I contacted those executive directors, and then from there they apply through our application process. And it's a pretty thorough evaluation process. And then we deem if they're able to carry out the activity for us.
The reason why I'm asking these questions is because this is I come all the time and I hear this, and I heard that the CBG block grants last year, the money was referred to the stormwater drains because there was not enough people applying, or they did not qualify to get the grants. Once again, the individual citizen is not getting help. It's going to the Redevelopment Commission, okay, which is a part of the city that controls the city properties. Me as an individual renter or rentee, I'm not getting this block grant money, which I believe HUD has set aside for, not for the Redevelopment Commission. It is set aside for individuals like myself who have rental properties, who are looking for help to refabricate or work on my properties. So what it sounds like to me, as a citizen of New Bern, we're doing the least bit possible to contact citizens and ask them, do they need this help? Because this is the first time I've heard about this, and I come to these meetings on a regular basis. Second thing, if RCS and Catholic Charities are doing this, what about the Little Man, who's also doing this? You have other people, you have Peace Center on Noose Boulevard, on Trent Road, that's what they do. But they're not on this list, and they help numerous of people. You walk in their door, and they help you. But going through RCS and Catholic Charities, the red tape of trying to if I need help now with my rent. Okay, not that I gotta submit a ton of paperwork to see if I qualify. That's what I understand that this money is for. Maybe I have a misperception or read it differently, but it should not have been, in my mind, sent to somebody that I gotta go through a stack of paperwork to get money that the federal government has set aside to help me because I'm not working, because I've lost my job due to COVID. So I think we need to look at this and tailor it to where it fits our citizens' needs. That's my opinion, what I see as a little man who walks on the street.
Can I get clarification on one of his questions on regards to how the information is put out there for the nonprofits to, because I heard Sabrina say something, but I didn't hear what it was in regards to I know there's an application process, but was there a place where we've, broadcasted it on our city website saying that if you're a nonprofit that does these services, please apply because we may be able to provide you funding to continue these services?
Yes, so as a part of the annual action plan and as part of the substantial amendment plan, we do advertise in the newspaper, we do post the plan on the website, and try to distribute the information as widely as possible to make the community, our citizens, as well as our nonprofit agencies aware.
The housing part I'm concerned about, because Mr. Woods, I'm not sure, it's been my understanding with CDBG funds, they were for very low income. You had to show a very low income, almost to the point of maybe losing your home to apply for those funds. And I know they have different segments of funds, so I'm not sure I understand. That's why those funds were not used and moved to that Duffy Field project I think you were talking about earlier. So I'm a little fuzzy on that. Maybe you could clarify that.
Yes, ma'am. The previous substantial amendment that I referenced before was related to unspent funds from previous fiscal years. HUD does have a timeliness check that is performed annually, and in that case, we actually got behind on our spending. We had above the 1.5% in our piggy bank, if you will, that is allowed by HUD each year. Therefore, we reallocated those funds into a project where we could spend them immediately.
But you're not, the question though is the level that your people are applying for the funds, or who can access those funds. Can Mr. Woods, anybody who owns property or who has maybe lost their job, or how are they going to figure out who can apply for these funds for housing rehab?
The housing rehab project that is active right now is specific. It is not the minor housing repair program that we had in years past.
Okay.
That was something where individual homeowners would apply directly to the city, and we would, vet it to see if they were eligible, if they met the income criteria, which there are income limits. There are also limits as far as the type of work that we could perform on the home, and the scope of work that we could perform on the home. It was a fairly minimal cap, and we did that. We executed that program for several years, and then it just came to the point that we were not able to have enough projects apply to bring them through to construction and actual execution. Therefore, that's why we had that excess in our fund for that particular project and reallocated it. Housing rehab now is to go to advance affordable housing goals within the community by partnering with the Redevelopment Commission to bring new, safe, affordable, energy-efficient housing onto the marketplace, which has been identified as a need throughout our five-year planning process.
Alderman Odom.
Amanda, the minor housing rehab fund, wasn't one of the requirements from HUD is that it's owner occupied?
Correct, yes. So the minor housing program was strictly for owner-occupied housing, and as you all are aware from the stats in our, CDBG plan and redevelopment plan, about 80% of the properties within the greater Duffyfield community are renter-occupied. Therefore, that's part of the reason that we have partnered with the Redevelopment Commission in their plan to increase the quantity of affordable rental housing within the boundary area.
And one last question. Are we required to funnel this money through a nonprofit, or can the city administer that ourselves?
It is most advantageous and encouraged for us to provide it to subrecipients. This is what they do, those agencies. They're already, active doing this work. They have the staff, they have the know-how to administer, grant programs such as this. And to Mr. Wood's point and some of your points, it helps us distribute those funds out into the community, directly into citizens' hands, much quicker than if we tried to implement the program throughout our internal department.
Amanda. Amanda, as you probably don't remember, and I agree with Mr. Woods that for the housing rehabilitation, there should be some funding there for those citizens that own their property. And when we was going through this action plan, when we first was talking about allocating money over to the Redevelopment Commission, I asked that question, it's like, where's some funding going to be for those individual homeowners that needs minor repairs to their homes that's not within the Redevelopment Commission? So is there any way that we can, notice what, $107,000? As we go along with with the CDBG funds, is there any way that we can put, I'll just say $100,000 for the housing rehabilitation, and then the other portion goes to the Redevelopment Commission, instead of the Redevelopment Commission having all of the housing rehabilitation funding?
Yes, our annual allocation is somewhere around $250,000 total each year. It is certainly an option that when the new allocations come out for the next planning year, that we can designate those funds to whichever projects or activities that the board would like to see. That's certainly something that can be accomplished. As far as timeliness, it is challenging to work those homes through the process within the basic year or less than a year that we have to execute those projects. So we prioritized things that we could get done more quickly based on the challenges we'd experienced in recent years and the impact of Hurricane Florence.
So, my last question is, in regards to, the criteria, that's set by HUD, correct? There's not anything where if the income was 40,000, the board can make a decision and do 50,000. This comes strictly from the federal government, correct?
Correct. As you are aware, probably many presentations that I've given up here, HUD has a very strict set of guidance or guidelines that must be followed for all of these types of programs and activities. And, as I mentioned, the allocation we receive annually at around $250,000, it's certainly, we try to, do the most bang for our buck, in certain years.
Amanda, one other thing I want to say, in reference to Mr. Woods, as he says, he's a nonprofit as well. So is this a process that we need to look at to try to incorporate other nonprofits as sort of like a bidding process as we go through, so that we can have other nonprofits incorporated into this program?
Yeah, absolutely. We encourage, we have a distribution list of nonprofit organizations. So, anyone that is listening tonight or any of the board members that are aware of an organization that is doing work in the community, please share those contact information with us. We put out surveys, we advertise in the newspaper, we put things on websites, we attend various different meetings. So we try to make sure that people are aware so they can tell us what the needs are, tell us what they see in the community. Each year and then every 5 years, we are looking at all of the data and doing an assessment of what the needs are in the community and who can help us meet those goals. So we always encourage people to contact us to get on our list.
One last question. Is there any type of programs or anything that could be done to work with the actual owners for the individuals that may live in these blighted apartments that could help them so that the renters are not struggling if, because they can't apply? But is there a way or any type of funding that the city can work with the owners even though they're not occupying it, or that's off the table?
As Alderman Odom stated, what we had available at our disposal was based on owner-occupied rehabs. It is not we're not necessarily allowed to use these funds to rehab rental properties or work with rental owners, property owners, to do the same kind of work.
Gotcha.
What's the difference between the Redevelopment Commission getting the money and reestablishing rental homes, and me as a leasing, as a rent, having homes and renting them out?
Yes, you're doing it for profit, correct?
They're doing it for profit.
The Redevelopment Commission is established by general statute, correct, Mr. Attorney?
And they're not doing it for profit.
Not in the sense,
Profit is profit. Profit is profit. Period.
Okay.
You're not taking a loss on the buildings. You're not taking loss on the properties. The Redevelopment Commission, no way is taking a loss. So how is it that they can qualify for it and me, and I can't? It's the same thing. A renter is a renter. Look up the word renter. It doesn't say, it doesn't designate.
I'll clarify. I'm sorry. So just to be very clear, the Redevelopment Commission went through about a 1.5 year long process working with HUD to get certified to receive HUD funding as a community redevelopment agency. If Mr. Woods is a CRA, he can apply for it. If he's a nonprofit builder with a track record of building nonprofits, he can apply for it. And that's that goes across the board to the entire city. As we've said a few times, our previous rehab programs really stalled out because of the owner-occupied requirement and the income requirement. We probably rehabbed about, 17 homes, and we started to really accumulate money because we hit all the low-hanging fruit, and people stopped applying for the program. It's not for lack of trying, it was for lack of applicants, and we quickly accumulated $400,000 in money that we needed to spend very quickly, or we were going to lose it. That's the reason why I went to the Duffyfield Stormwater Drainage Project, which is a fabulous project for Duffyfield, by the way. So it's really being used to improve the community, which is what the intent of the redevelopment of the HUD and CDBG funds is. So that's the reason. Anybody can be, if you go through the process and be certified at the federal level as a community redevelopment agency, you are more than, you have $1 million. CDBG funds are just a small portion of the funding that you can receive. So it's not simply you're a nonprofit and you get to build homes. It's much, much, much more detailed and very difficult to go through that process and be approved for HUD funding. But everybody can do it. But it's not up to the city, Amanda, myself, the board, to figure out who gets that funding. Those are very strict HUD rules, and we get, we get told all the time if we stray from the path of HUD funding. So I'm hoping I clarified a few things there.
Just for a moment, just for anybody watching that may not understand or may not have been to
Sure.
a redevelopment meeting, can you just explain what the process is in regards to renting? Like, they're going to be purchasing property, rehabbing it, renting it, that money
Sure.
is going to go back into the redevelopment to continue the redevelopment.
That's right, yeah. So it's very clear from the Redevelopment Commission standpoint, obviously profit is not the motive. It's rebuilding a community is the motive. So using CDBG funds and leveraging those funds for what they're used for is improving community, is to create what Amanda said, safe, energy efficient, modern rental housing in a community that's 78% renters, right? So we're meeting the need at its face, providing a modern product that's energy efficient for everybody, and then any profits that are received have to be used back in the community. So there's no pot of money that the Redevelopment Commission gets to buy new cars with. Every penny goes back into the community for better streets, better sidewalks, anything like that. So anything that's consistent with the goals and objectives of the redevelopment plan, which is robust, which deals with storm drainage, which deals with housing, which deals with health and wellness, which deals with economic development. So any of those types of things, all that money gets reinvested back into the community, not into anybody's pockets or anything like that.
And that's what the board all voted on to do with the funds, is to put it back into the community.
Correct.
They have
100%.
to. It's not a matter of
Yeah.
voting, that's the mission.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in the future, there may be a scenario where, that money is free. But again, board's policy is to put it right back in the community.
Okay, do you have a comment?
Just, I'm a numbers guy. I'm just wondering why the entitlement fund costs 20% of the available money and the other fund only costs 10%.
Are you talking about the general administration line item?
Yeah, I mean, you're using $50,000, that's 20% of the entitlement fund.
Correct. That is what we are allowed to take as a percentage of the annual allocation that goes to cover staff costs and all of the administering functions for monitoring the CDBG program. As you all are aware, reporting and working with HUD to make sure that we adhere to all of their guidelines is a tedious process. As I mentioned before, related to the CDBG CB funds, we significantly reduced that amount because we are partnering with other sub-recipient agencies and felt that it was better for us to get that money out into the community, into the hands of individuals that have been impacted by the pandemic. Therefore, we reduced our city general administration fee to 10% in this case.
Okay, we're still under a public hearing. If the public wants to come forward, ask questions, make comments, you're welcome to come up.
Mayor, if there's no more comments to be made, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second, is there discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. Motion carries.
Mayor, just for a clarification on that number 10, as a part of this annual action plan amendment, this will be coming before you, since we had the public hearing tonight, it will come before you at the next board meeting for your consideration of approving or not.
Okay, let's go to item number 11.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 11 is a public hearing and consideration of the board to adopt a statement of consistency or inconsistency for 3205, 3207, and 3209 Country Club Road. And if they do find this to be consistent, adopt an ordinance to rezone those properties at 3205, 3207, and 3209. Samantha and Wendell Wright, along with Brian McCracken, the owners of 3205, 07, and 09 Country Club Road, are seeking to rezone the properties from R15 to R10 residential districts. Parcels consist of approximately 1.3 acres. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ruggieri for the presentation, and after that, if the board will
Yes,
consider
sir.
a public hearing.
Now, we conduct a public hearing. Mr. Davis, I remember we had a public hearing, did we not, on this item?
Yes, sir. This was continued. You guys are doing this since start over.
Yeah, this is new.
And, okay, well, I was wondering if we could have a second public hearing, but you totally cleaned the slate on the first one, and this is a totally new one, so you can have a public hearing.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you.
Restart over. Good question.
Yep. Thank you. I'm back.
It's the Jeffrey Jerry show
Yeah,
tonight.
it's horrible for everybody, right? My accent gets worse the more I talk. So the city manager summed up what we're doing. We'll just go over a little bit of the details. So we have a general request here from Mr. McCracken for 3 lots on Country Club Road. Country Club Road. They are existing zoning of R15. The request is to turn them into R10 zoning. It's 1.38 acres, and all the parcels are vacant. There you can see the blue box is the northernmost, followed by 3 stars underneath it. That is the entire request before you tonight, those 3 lots with the stars in them. Our 15 residential district is designed for low-density, single-family dwellings with a minimum square footage of 15,000 square foot per lot. R10, magically, allows for single and 2-family and also, I believe, duplexes. But I'll just leave that out right now. But minimum square footage is 10,000 square feet for an R10, so that's the request. Correct, that was right. There we go. So the uses that are allowed in R10 is single-family detached, a single-family attached, townhomes, and duplexes, so 2 units on 1 lot. Surrounding zoning is all R15, and across the street is Trent Woods, and a little to the north is the church. And across from the church is the medical park, about 1,000 feet to the north of the project, but mostly low-density residential development. The CAMA Regional Land Use Plan classifies the area as developed with a maximum density of 1 to 5 units per acre. If rezoned to R10, the density would be approximately 4.3 units per acre, which would be consistent with the Regional Land Use Plan. All utilities are city services to the site. The site has medium suitability for development. It is in the 100-year floodplain. So there'll be some design standards that if it's built, will have to be met specifically for the floodplain. So planning and zoning reviewed this again, also recommended approval to you all, and staff also recommends approval. I'll answer any questions you may have.
So Jeff, and we can bring Mr. McCracken up here. Is it my understanding that, because originally he was the issue was the frontage and putting something, so he's going to take these 3 lots and now make 4 lots. So is that a subdivision? Do we have to do something different?
So right now, we're just changing zoning on property. If you were to create another lot, he would have to go through the subdivision process, and we've already ran those numbers. Every lot will have at least 80 feet of frontage, a little bit more. Lot sizes will still be in the high 14,900s for 3 of them, and the 4th one would be over 18,000 square feet. So as far as lot sizes go, you won't have much of a change between zoning. Classifications between R15, which is a minimum of 15,000 square feet, and R10, which is a minimum of 10,000 square feet. But if it is cut into 4 lots, the lots will effectively be about the same as an R15, one of them being larger. Just the lot frontage will be about 80 feet, 85 feet or so.
And this will be allowed, but is he going to have to come back, though?
I wouldn't have to come back to the Board of Aldermen, no. It'll go through a different process, going through planning and zoning, correct.
I just want everybody to know that I talked to Alderman Aster. Of course, he's not here, and he's the alderman for the ward. He found that it was within the character of the neighborhood by doing it this way. So I'm okay with it.
Okay, it's okay. I'm going to open a public hearing. Anybody from the public that would like to come up and make any comments, statements concerning this item, ask questions, you're free to do that at this time. Public hearing is open.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to close public hearing. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carries.
Does anybody have any questions? If not, I'll go ahead and I'd like to make a motion to adopt a statement of consistency for 3205, 3207, and 3209 Country Club Road.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call, starting with Alderman Odom.
Alderman Odom.
Yes.
Alderman Best.
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey.
Yes.
Mayor Outlaw.
Yes.
Alderwoman Harris.
Yes.
Alderman Bingle.
Yes.
Motion carries. Item number 12.
Nope,
We
we
gotta-
gotta adopt it.
Now
I'm
I'd
sorry
like to
you didn't
make
have that.
a motion
I
to
got
adopt
you.
an ordinance to rezone 3205, 3207, and 3209 Country Club Road to R10.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call, starting with Alderman Bingle.
Alderman Bingle.
Yes?
Alderwoman Harris.
Yes.
Mayor Outlaw.
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey.
Yes.
Alderman Best.
Yes.
Alderman Odom.
Yes.
Motion carries. Anything further on that item?
No, sir.
Okay, let's go to item number 12.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 12 is also a public hearing and consideration of the board to adopt a statement of consistency or inconsistency for tax parcel ID 8-211-005, and if they choose that it is consistent, that they would rezone this property located, identified as tax parcel ID 8-211-005. Mr. Raines, who's here with us tonight also, has a parcel that's located kind of in between or near Arcadia Village and Academy Green subdivisions. It's a 42-acre piece of property looking to rezone from R10 to R6. I'll turn it over to Mr. Ruggieri for the presentation of this item.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. I put the parcel up in front of y'all. Mr. Stevens hit the stats right on. It's a 42-acre parcel requesting a rezoning from R10 to R6. There's the parcel before you. We have New Bern High over to the left, really a block back from US 70 and Arcadia Village to the east or west. So. The R10 district, again, is single-family detached, attached townhomes and duplexes with a minimum square footage of 10,000 square foot per lot. Going to R6, which is as a minimum square footage of 6,000 square feet, also allows for single-family detached, attached duplexes in there also, and mobile homes permitted as consistent with 15164. Already hit all that stuff. Just, I guess, for nursing homes and childcare homes in the R6, those are special use permits, not allowed by right. Also, multifamily is a special use permit in R6. It's not permitted in R10. So just a little more intense type of use in the R6 zoning category. Surrounding, it is all, I thought we had a good map of it. Pretty much R6 all around it. There's what, R10 to the north. The high school is over to the right, and then all C3 along MLK to the south of the project. So it really is kind of an R10 stuck in the middle of an R6 district. All the utilities provided by the city. It is vacant and undeveloped, and has a high suitability development as it is outside the 100-year floodplain. Planning and zoning heard this, recommended a Board of Aldermen approve this rezoning. Staff has reviewed it, also recommends approval. And I'll answer any questions you may have.
Board have questions at this time? Seeing none, let's have a open public hearing. Anybody like any comments, questions, statements about this item? You're free to come up at this time.
Mayor, if there's no other comments, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion second to close the public hearing. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the same. Motion carries.
Can we do it all in one?
Mr. Davis, we've done that before.
Okay. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt a statement of consistency for tax parcel ID 8-211-005.
Second.
Okay, motion second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call starting with Alderman Odom.
Alderman Odom.
Yes.
Alderman Best.
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey.
Yes.
Mayor Outlaw.
Yes.
Alderwoman Harris.
Yes.
Alderman Bingle.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt an ordinance to rezone tax parcel ID 8-211-005.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call starting with Alderman Bingle.
Alderman Bingle.
Yes.
Alderwoman Harris.
Yes.
Mayor Outlaw.
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey.
Yes.
Alderman Best.
Yes.
Alderman Odom.
Yes.
Motion carries. Item number 13.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 13 is a public hearing and consideration of the board to adopt an ordinance to annex 431 Riverside Drive. Mr. and Mrs. Pissarro, the owners of the property, have requested that the .575 acre parcel be annexed into the city limits of the city of New Bern. After conducting the public hearing, the board will consider this ordinance to annex the property. The memo is included in your packet from Mr. Ruggieri. And just so everyone knows where Riverside Drive is, it's across the river in the Bridgeton area. Many sewer-related issues over there. Many of the properties requesting annexation due to that fact. So this one's along the water, closer towards the end of Riverside Drive. Happy to answer any questions, or Mr. Ruggieri will answer any questions you have.
Does the board have questions? Seeing none, let's have a open public hearing at this time. Anybody like to have any questions answered, make comments, statements about this item, you're free to come up.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion second to close public hearing. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same. Motion carries.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt an ordinance to annex 431 Riverside Drive.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call starting with Alderman Bingle.
Alderman Bingle.
Yes.
Alderwoman Harris.
Yes.
Mayor Outlaw.
Yes.
Alderman Kinsey.
Yes.
Alderman Best.
Yes.
Alderman Odom.
Yes.
Motion carries. Appointments, Alderman Bingle.
None tonight, sir.
Alderwoman Harris.
None tonight, Mayor.
Alderman Kinsey.
No, sir.
Okay, Alderman Best.
None.
And Alderman Odom.
None, sir. Thank you.
Attorney's report. City manager's report.
One thing, Mayor, I wanted to bring up, the fire department has found out about a potential grant opportunity that has a short time frame. This grant is a FEMA-related grant that they wish to use for SCBA equipment. The SCBA equipment is the oxygen tanks, basically, that they utilize to enter into smoky locations, and it's a breathing apparatus. Those models are, the SCBA models that they currently have are no longer in production by Honeywell. So they basically have an end of life. The replacement components of that have basically become very difficult to get. The current SCBAs that are used by New Bern Fire and Rescue meet the 2013 standards, and they're currently about 2 standards behind the National Fire Prevention Act Association standards if they cannot be replaced. They found this grant that they have, this FEMA grant that is about almost close to $400,000 grant opportunity. There is a match associated with it. The total cost to replace all of the Honeywell SCBA equipment that they have is around $416,000, $415,965 to be in total. They had planned to kind of replace these over a period of several years, but due to Honeywell's basically failure, or I don't know if you want to call it failure, but being that they no longer are producing these and the equipment's harder to find, they're asking the board's support to apply for this FEMA grant. There is a cost share that the city would incur for $37,815 out of the total $415,000, almost $416,000 grant that they would apply for. So I'm looking for some direction for the board so that Bobby has some authority to apply for this grant. As I said, the city would be looking at a commitment of around $38,000 for this to move forward, and that would replace all of the SCBA equipment that they currently have and bring it up to the new standard. Otherwise, we may be looking at a period of cost associated with this over a period of years and incurring that full amount. I'm happy to answer questions. Chief Boyd's back there if you want to answer or ask him any more detailed questions regarding this.
I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, Tardis, what was the total cost to replace it?
So the total cost is $415,965. There's a match share of the city of $37,815. So that means the FEMA share of it would be $378,150 if we're awarded the grant.
Absolutely.
Mark, what's the lifespan of these units?
It's about 10. Bobby probably knows this a lot better than I do.
Standard is about 5 years. So 13, so 18, one standard. When you get 2 standards, they start looking at you to have replacement. So it's about 10 to 15 year mark.
And is this typical of Honeywell? I mean, is this typical of the industry to discontinue?
No, we were taken back about, and we were told about 6 months to a year ago. So we started looking at how we're going to do this, and said, let's try the FEMA grant first. And see, the problem is intercompatibility. You can't take 2 different brands and put them together; they don't work. So you have to have them be all the same.
So we can get a different brand than Honeywell this time if we
Oh,
get the
no
grant?
doubt.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's go with this.
You need a motion?
Just some direction of the board if y'all want a straw poll or just a bunch of head shakes that he can go ahead and apply. And then what we can do is if we do award this, it would come back to y'all as a budget amendment for this roughly $38,000 as a cost share match.
I'm good.
Yeah, I just had a question in regards to that, because you said there was a sense of urgency. Is there possibly maybe a discussion where, like, if we know that the grant is going to be a benefit and maybe there might be a matching, like we set a cap so that you don't even have to bring it to us, it can just be handled? Like if it's no more than 50,000 match or
I think maybe it
35?
looked like, what's the match is less than 10% on this one.
It is,
Yeah.
but again, it's an unbudgeted amount. It's not in our current budget, and I just feel a little bit obligated that if we're going to be applying for grants that requires a city match, that we bring that before the board, because it's almost as if I'm committing funds that haven't been approved by the board.
Yeah,
If the board wishes to give me the authority and they're okay with that, I assume that would be it. I don't know how Scott feels about that, but I mean, I'm willing to work within, what I would probably do is just budget a certain amount per year that's towards these grants, and if we start going over it, then we can make an
Yeah, I
adjustment.
think that's a good idea, just in case, you know, the sense of urgency, if we don't have a board meeting, we would do a special called meeting to give approval to do something like that. It's just a thought, I'm not
Yeah,
trying to.
I think as far as the timeline goes, what I'm looking for tonight is just a direction that you're going to be okay with this. He can apply for it, and if we're awarded it, then at that point, we'd make an amendment. Now, if grants are kind of all over the place. Sometimes grants require board action in order for us to submit it. Some of them do not, but they require a match, which again, if we haven't budgeted for it, I want to make sure the board's aware of it and you're okay with the expense. And then some of them you can just apply for that are 100% that no require match of the city, and those are pretty simple because most of the time the board's going to be amenable to us applying for those, because ultimately you're going to have to accept us accepting the grant anyways because we're going to have to make a budget amendment. So we just wanted to kind of get your guidance on it.
I think your direction is to move forward.
Absolutely.
That's all I needed, sir. Other than that, I have nothing else, sir.
Alderman Bingham, let's go to new business.
I just want to, again, it seems like it comes in waves, express my condolences, first of all, to the family of Ken Morris. What a wonderful New Bernian. We never know when God's going to call us. I actually saw him and gave him a hug a week ago today, and God took him home on Friday. So, you know, somebody that's born and raised here in New Bern knew very well, and I just want to extend my deepest sympathy to him and his family. And then, of course, our very own Veronica Maddox, who was our former city clerk and works with Foster Hughes in his department, suddenly lost her mom this morning, and I'm heartbroken over that one as well. So I just want to extend, I know the board would want to send their deepest sympathy to her and her family. So that's, you know, really, it's been tough here lately. People just leaving us left and right. And some of our iconic citizens, that's what I'm just saying, you know, Miss Evans, just so much in our community, so loved, her and her husband, so loved by this community. I'm glad they're reunited again. But, you know, Commissioner Sampson, Mr. Morris, Lonnie Pridgeon, it just seems like this has been the year to lose so many wonderful people from our community. So I'm really saddened by that, and that's really about all I have to say tonight.
Okay, Alderwoman Harris.
Thank you. Mr. Bouchard, would you be able to come to the mic and give me an update on the light situation on for that area on Water Street? I know we were asking to see if it could be evaluated in regards to getting a light because it's dark on that road over by Sharon Bryant's.
Can you help me understand the location?
You know where Sharon Bryant, she lives on Water Street. Waters, and about checking to see if we're able to get a light on that pole because it's very dark.
I'll follow up on that. I'm not familiar with the location here.
Okay, I'll resend the email to you then.
Thank you.
Yep, and then, Mr. Foster, would you be able to give us an update of any of the activity that's going on at the Omega Center in regards to any after-school programs and stuff, if we're getting any foot traffic?
Yes, ma'am. Both the Omega Center and West Denver Recreation Center programs have really been hit and miss, but our Parks and Recreation staff has started implementing other programs. As a matter of fact, I just saw some of the flyers today over at the Omega Center. They're getting ready to start back up the Mommy and Me program. They've got some Martin Luther King trivia bingo days that are coming up. I think there are 2 days for seniors, 2 days for children coming up. We're still doing the weekday walking program over there. They're also working on a spring camp, both at the Omega Center as well as over at the West New Bern Recreation Center. There are like 6 or 8 programs that are getting ready to come out, and I know that my recreation superintendent has been going out to some of the area churches, dropping some things off with the area resource group to get that information out to the citizens as well.
Awesome. And that stuff is going up on the website to be reposted and stuff as well, correct?
That's correct. So we also have things, we're posting those on Facebook, on our Facebook page, as well as at our Parks and Recreation page on newbernnc.gov.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Besides that, just, you know, everybody, just make sure you're wearing your mask, washing your hands, and social distancing so that we can so to slow the spread and get our businesses and everything back open and kids back in school, so that's it.
Okay.
Oh, happy Valentine's Day.
Alderman Kinsey.
I don't have anything, sir.
Alderman Best.
I just want to extend out my deepest condolences to Veronica and her family. Veronica and her mom was just like two peas in a pod, and Veronica is going through a very difficult time right now, so just send out prayers for her and her family.
Alderman Odom.
Nothing tonight, sir.
Okay, do we need a closed session tonight?
Yes, sir, briefly, pursuant to 143, 1311A6 to discuss a personnel matter.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second, is there discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carries.